Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back, everyone, to The Wilder Ride, Getting Wilder by the Minute, a podcast where we break down and celebrate the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. I'm Alan Sanders, one of your hosts.
I'm Walt Murray, your co-host.
And our inaugural season, we are breaking down the film Young Frankenstein. And joining us now from his playground, where he's analyzing 1 minute over and over and over again, as Bill Murray continues to live his life over and over again on the Groundhog Minute. Joining us, Sean German. Welcome back, Sean.
Didn't you just say that?
There we go. It felt like just yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you for having me back. And yeah, I'll do it all over again. One more day of watching 1 minute of Young Frankenstein and getting to talk about it with you guys.
When we first announced that we were going to be doing the Wilder Ride, you pretty much reached out. You were one of the first people actually to reach out, excited about the concept and the idea. What drew you to what we were trying to do with our own minute-by-minute podcast?
Well, this is kind of a secret. I haven't told a lot of people about it. There was a very good chance this was going to be the next movie I covered minute by minute. I'd really wanted to do Groundhog Day and had kind of been planning that from the beginning in terms of my podcast beginning. I'd always wanted to do Groundhog Day. And I picked up a co-host and set up the website, and we were getting ready to start recording. But already in the back of my head, I was thinking, okay, what's the next project? What do I do after Groundhog Day? And this was very high on my list. And when you guys had announced, you'd just come out, okay, we're doing the movies of Gene Wilder, and you hadn't said which movie you were going to start with yet. And I'm thinking, I hope they don't do Young Frankenstein. I hope they don't do Young Frankenstein. I know other people have done. There are other movies that have more than one podcast, but I kind of wanted to be, kind of breaking new ground there. And then my wife suggested, well, why don't you reach out to them and say, hey, I obviously wouldn't be able to do this now. I think I can only do one movie at a time. I do have a day job. I do need to earn money. But she was like, well, reach out to them and maybe, say, okay, if they do another movie now, when they're done with that movie and you're done with Groundhog Day, maybe you can work with them and I'll do Young Frankenstein together. And then before I actually had a chance to reach out to you, you came out with your minute zero trailer where you announced you're doing Young Frankenstein. And I'm like, well, this is great. I get the podcast about Young Frankenstein. I get to listen to it. And then I don't have to, I don't have to do the editing. I don't have to schedule the guests. I don't have to do all the work. I can just be a listener. And if I get to be a guest, even better.
Funny. That's exactly what Walt said. I don't have to do any of the work either.
That's exactly right. I'm trying to avoid any semblance of work on this. But by basically screwing up everything that I do actually do.
The Midas touch, you're the opposite. Instead of turning things to gold, pretty much things turn to
But I did bring coffee, so
you did bring that.
There you go. He does bring something to the table. That's great.
Yeah, I bring next to nothing to the table, really.
Yes, there is nothing, a picture in the dictionary, and then next to nothing is a picture of Walt.
In fact, I have built my entire career on basically doing next to nothing.
Some people have still yet to figure out their niche. You know what it is.
I've nailed it.
What is my job? Next to nothing.
Next to nothing.
Okay. So when you read Dilbert, you're really identifying with Wally.
Yeah. Well, they named him after me, basically.
They
didn't
want
to
change
pay
it a
me.
little bit legal reasons.
Exactly.
But
we know.
Yeah. But this is for folks that are familiar with my work in podcasting, whether it was Spinal Tap or Groundhog Day or other movies, this is the movie I go back to, Young Frankenstein. When people say, what makes a good movie? What do you want to talk about? What makes a great movie for this kind of analysis to dig in 1 minute at a time, or just in general, what makes a great movie? And one of the things I say is the movies that are really great are the movies that do more than one thing. That if you have a great comedy, that's great. I love comedies. I love to laugh. A great comedy is a great thing. You can be a great comedy and do something else as well and be great in another context. And I'll use another collaboration between Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks, and that's Blazing Saddles. I think Blazing Saddles is one of the funniest movies ever made. I also think it holds up as a Western. that if you just ignore the comedy aspect, I'm not an expert on Western movies, but I think it's a really, really good, possibly great Western. And it's like, oh, if you can be a great comedy and a great Western at the same time, that's a great movie. And when you get to Young Frankenstein, I mean, great comedy undersells it. I would put this top 5, and I think possibly number 1, but when you get into that level, you're splitting hair. Like, top 5 comedy is great comedy. It doesn't matter where it is amongst them. But also in terms of theatrical telling of the Frankenstein story, I don't think it's a scary movie. It's not a horror movie, but it is a monster movie. And so you've got those two dimensions, great monster movie and a great comedy. You put them together and it's one of the best movies ever made. The direction, the acting, the writing, you get two incredible talents, all-time greats. You have Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. And as great as Mel Brooks is, and he's got shelves full of awards of all types, so he doesn't need me to tell him how great he is. But I think his best work is in his collaborations with Gene Wilder, the producers, Blazing Saddles, and then here Young Frankenstein. Just everything comes together to make an amazing movie. So again, as soon as I heard you guys were covering it, one, I was happy to be able to hear it. I'm like, great, I want to listen to this podcast. And then an opportunity to be a guest and join in and talk about the movie as well, and not necessarily take over the podcast and talk as much as I am doing. But, I probably should have warned you. If when you invited me on to talk about Young Frankenstein, I'm going to come on and I'm going to talk about Young Frankenstein. I can talk about this movie for days at a time if you let me.
Well, good.
Thanks.
Well, good. It's saving us from all the work right now. We're just kicked back, relaxed, got the feet propped up, mimosas sipping.
Watching for a train to come by.
Waiting for the train.
Well, Sean, you come to this movie with many of the same things that I do, because this is one of my favorite Gene Wilder movies and Mel Brooks movies. We debated between this and Blazing Saddles as our first movie, and frankly, I think came to Young Frankenstein for two reasons. Number one, I did say that this was my favorite Gene Wilder movie, but second, some of the social issues that come up in Blazing Saddles, we weren't really ready to tackle as our first movie. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think you do see the genius of Gene Wilder. And even in this minute, we see a lot of the genius of Gene Wilder right off the bat, because this whole scene here where he ends up with his face pinched between the wall and the bookshelf is just such a crazy scene. And yet he doesn't go over the top with it. He just begins to play with that whole big picture of the scene here.
Well, let's go ahead and set the table where we are for minute number 27, because when we last left, Dr. Frankenstein was still trapped behind the bookcase. Inga was still hanging onto the candle, and they were trying to figure out how to get the mechanism to follow some logical functioning, I don't know, was supposed to follow some pattern, which it doesn't seem to. So at the very beginning of this minute, we see Gene Wilder. You say he's a genius, but his character didn't really think this one through, because his great idea is, hey, how about this? Put the candle back and I'll block the bookcase with my body. What could possibly go wrong there?
Absolutely, that'll work.
And of course, Inga doesn't question the good doctor. I mean, she is the lab assistant. She's not there to question how or why. She's there but to do. And so she promptly puts the candle back, and we have this wonderful moment of the bookcase coming sliding around, and we see Gene Wilder's expression as he says, okay, I'm halfway in the room. Time to slide a little bit out so I can block this bookcase. And the camera cuts off of him just as we hear the crash.
Yeah, and we see Inga's great expression of, uh-oh, this is bad.
Inga's got that look of like, ooh, that looks like it might have hurt.
Yeah, that's going to smart.
Sean, before we get to the expression on Gene Wilder's face, again, trying to remember or even going back and rewatching, when we see the first segment here, this first third of the minute, when the bookcase comes flying around, we've heard the great plan. I'll block the bookcase with my body. She dutifully replies. We see him step out of the edge of the bookcase just as it's about to hit, and the camera cuts to her as she closes her eyes, and we hear the crash. What were you thinking?
Well, yeah, this is great, and more great facial expressions from Inga. The shudder as we hear the bookcase slam against. Well, we know it's Frederick's body because he told us what he was intending to do. But this is one of those times less is more. in comedy. It's not over the top. There's no zany sound effects or anything. And, they don't even show it. We don't even see what happens. We see her reaction. We see her shudder. We see her worried look on her face. She's not sure what to do. And she's just been following the directions of the genius scientist. I mean, he must know what he's doing. He's a doctor after all. It's just wonderful.
And she's really depending on him for her well-being at this point, and now she watches him get smashed in the wall here, and it is her expression is great because it's somewhere between forlorn and lost, and what the heck did I just witness? What do I do now?
You know what I love about it too, in terms of how they edited and cut this scene together. We don't need to see the crash just yet, which is better in our heads. I mean, we in our minds, we're imagining how bad was this. And we don't know the comedic part just yet. And we don't even get to see Gene until we hear his voice sounding much like his stoned voice in Blazing Saddles, his sort of Mickey Mouse voice.
Yes.
Oh, Sheriff Bark. In this case, he's like, no, I want you to listen very carefully. And then we cut to him and we see his face. Like, it's like even his face is mushed.
Yeah. And he's using his finger to kind of direct and kind of say, just don't put the candle back. Everything is, it is just a perfectly framed shot of him.
What I realize here is he even has understood, okay, that was a dumb plan.
Not the smartest thing I've ever done.
So I've got another idea. Put the candle down. And instead, I want you to ram yourself into the other end of the bookcase as hard as you possibly can.
Yeah, which she's probably $1.25 soaking wet, so it's not going to, there isn't a whole lot she can do with that.
What I love is as he's directing with his finger, it comes back to her and she's being very dutiful. She's a very good lab assistant.
She really is. She really is.
Yeah, she's hanging on his every word. She's going to follow whatever craziness he suggests. He's just going straight forward. I mean, I guess given the circumstance, this may not be the best time to sit back and contemplate and review the situation and formulate a plan. It does look kind of painful the way he is squished up against this bookcase. So whatever he's going to have her do, I assume he wants her to do it quickly. So he comes up with this plan. I don't know. I live in a world where there's not a lot of hidden bookcases. Not a lot of people I know have the starting at $10,000 hanging around to get these things installed in their castles. Maybe this is more common where Frederick comes from. I'm not quite sure where this plan comes from. The whole just push on the bookcase. We're going to go. We tried the candle. Now we're just going to go brute force, run full steam and give it a shove that way. He seems to know what he's doing, but I can appreciate, given his situation, he's going to want to come up with something quickly. That's going to kind of get him out of this.
Well, and he's quickly running out of options. There are a whole lot of other ideas here.
Yeah. Now, here's the part that, again, this is how I work. I'm thinking to myself, it went around one particular way, and it seems to have that one particular clockwise direction. So in my head, I'm thinking the physics behind building a bookcase like this, because it's got to be sturdy enough. You don't want it to just turn on a dime. There's probably like locking gears that it could only go one way. So my first thought was, how are you going to try to bang it the other way? But I guess in desperation, you're going to give desperation a try.
Yes, I think your biggest mistake is trying to use logic.
Yeah, oops. Well, I love when he finally gives Inga the plan, and you see her eyes almost darting, almost like she's taking mental notes. Okay, don't put the candle back. I have to put it down. I'm going to then turn back, and I'm going to run at the bookcase as hard as I can and try to jar it loose. And so she puts the candle down. You see her take a deep breath, and you know what? When you freeze frame and you look at this, not just a minute at a time, but a second at a time, she looks like she's ready to hit the line of a football game.
Yeah, she's running. Like a linebacker coming through.
She has that look of like, all right, I'm going to give it my all.
Very intentional, very intense.
And she throws her shoulder into it.
She really does. She hits it hard.
Yeah, she's a really good assistant. I mean, you have to remember, I mean, I don't know if she was sleeping or if she was up late. Maybe she had a nightmare the same way Frederick did. But they're in their night clothes. They're all ready for bed. They were in for the night. She was not planning on assisting the doctor and probably certainly not planning on this kind of physical activity. But she's going to be the good assistant. She gives it the old college try, I guess.
Yeah, and we had mentioned earlier in another episode that her mother is actually her clothing designer and dress mistress. So it's a very I keep being surprised by the choice of clothing for her for this movie.
Well, it is Mel Brooks directing.
It is Mel Brooks directing.
It's good to be the king.
But, it's also not, it's not over the top.
No,
though.
it's not. No,
it
actually,
really isn't.
It's not.
Yeah, it's not History of the World kind of over the top comedy here.
Or Blazing Saddles, which he had already done.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's very tasteful. I mean, it's not crazy.
It's enough to be tantalizing without being titillating.
Right. And it fits the movie. It really fits the movie, and it fits the scene. And
it does.
Kind of what you
there's
expect
actually a pretty
her
there's,
to wear.
There's a funny joke actually coming up, I think, in the next minute regarding her wardrobe. But as we are still in this minute, the plan does work, much as opposed to my logic thinking, well, there's gears, it must only turn one way, so that way it'll keep everything in place. It won't, waver back and forth. It does actually go counterclockwise with enough force behind it. And Gene is finally revealed to be free from the trap, but now Inga is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, and he has such a great look of relief on his face, and I'm out. And then Inga from behind the bookcase says, "Put the candle back."
And that's what I love about this scene. It takes its time. He's free. We realize we're watching. We see she's stuck. He comes out, collapses nearly on a chair. He's just exhausted. He's hurting, whatever. We take our time. We don't rush to her line. And all of a sudden you hear her very frustrated behind the bookshelf. "Put the candle back."
And this is great. This is the same, give or take an accent. This is the same line, kind of punctuated the same way we got last minute from Frederick, and was not funny at all. And now we get the same situation, the same line, the same reading for the most part, and it's hilarious.
And this is where I said yesterday, the joke is being set up before we even know there's another joke coming when he delivered that first line. And I love this movie. It does this so often, Walt. It gives us something that we don't necessarily think is going to be funny or is funny until all of a sudden 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes later, it circles back on itself and you have to go, "Oh, I get it." And I love those "oh, I get it" moments, or "oh my gosh, that's what they're talking about."
Yeah, and I do really appreciate this movie taking its time to deliver the jokes. And this is a great example of that, and it would not be as funny if it was rushed. They pace slowly through it and bring you joke after joke after joke at a very good pace. And it gives you time to laugh. It gives you time to digest what just happened and to look forward to going, "Oh, wait a minute, Inga's not there. What just happened? What's going to happen next?" So the comedy here is just amazing.
Well, Sean, talk to this for a second. For me, a movie like this, why it's always in my top 10 to go back and watch. There's so much to catch, and when you finally have seen it 4, 5, 6 times, even when you know what's coming, it's even funnier anticipating because you know what's coming next. It's like it's a rewatchability factor. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I can watch this, I can analyze it, and it's one of the questions I'm sure you've had people come up to you and ask, does this format, this kind of movies by minutes, this level of analysis, does it work with a comedy? Some people are skeptical. Are you killing the jokes? Are you taking the comedy out by overanalyzing the movie? I think this level of quality, you don't. And I've worked with comedies. I did Spinal Tap. I'm working my way through Groundhog, again, movies that are primarily known as comedies. And you see the intelligence of the construction. That it's not just maybe something that's just a surface level joke that maybe you can overanalyze and you lose the comedy of it when you do this. But when the writing and the performances are this good, that you have these levels. I mean, I found, particularly with Spinal Tap, I found it got funnier. I found that as much as I love that movie and as many times as I had seen it, there were things that I missed. And having covered it 1 minute at a time, it's a funnier movie in some respects than it was before I did it. And this movie, again, you were talking about how the setup comes. So now there's like 2 jokes, like your first viewing, that the put the candle back, that's one joke. But now that we know what's happening, when he says it before, now that becomes a joke because we know what's coming. So, that's just an example of one respect where I think there's more jokes, there's more to laugh at in knowing what's coming and having been through the movie before. So, yeah, I mean, some things that rely on the surprise aspect, yes, you're going to lose that when you go through a movie 1 minute at a time. But I personally, I'll gain a deeper appreciation, and I will notice things that I haven't done before that when something's done this well, that more than make up for the lack of surprise, just the new appreciation. And again, like the new jokes, the knowing, seeing things build, seeing things come together. I mean, some of these things are like an avalanche getting started. They're like one little snowball that builds into a huge snowball that builds into a mountain of snow of an avalanche of comedy coming at you that the first time through it strikes you unawares. And then the next time through you're like, oh, here comes that avalanche. I'm about to get buried in comedy. And I like it.
I think I agree with your analysis. A movie like this for me has become funnier in analyzing it because some of the times we're trying to figure out, okay, what was the joke and how would a 1974 modern audience, when this movie first came out, what did they know culturally that would have made it maybe even more relevant to them? Does it still work today? One of our early guests in this podcast was, a young, almost pre-millennial, and we wanted to see would somebody in their mid-20s find it as funny as us growing up watching this movie, and now in our 40s and 50s, this movie 40 plus years old now, 44 years old now, would they find it as funny? And so far, it seems to have transcended time. The bulk of the jokes do transcend.
Yeah, and you also see the interrelationship between the characters, and it's funny to see those relationships flip here as she becomes assertive from behind the wall and says, put the candle back. And he becomes the kind of lesser of the relationship, and now he's got to kind of scramble to get her out from behind the bookcase.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like seeing that. I like the reversal of roles. I like seeing a character who was maybe more passive, the assistant who was dutifully following directions, becoming more assertive. We hear that the loud voice, and she's not really screaming or yelling, but she's speaking up in volume so she can be heard through the bookcase. But it's not, the wallflower, excuse me, if you have a moment, if it's not too much trouble, could you put the candle back? No, it's a very emphatic, very similar reading that he gave last minute.
That same firm tone.
Yeah, very firm. She's giving the order, put the candle back.
Now, as he realizes, oh, crap, she is trapped behind the wall like I just was, he does go over, and as we start to wrap up this minute, apparently he's figured out the Rubik's Cube behind whatever this trigger mechanism is, because he puts the candle down initially into the holder, but then immediately pops it out and then pops it back in. And for some reason, that must stop it midway through.
Yeah, I think they probably just said, okay, we got to have something to end this and move on. But he figures it out and leaves the bookcase halfway open.
Which, of course, we will see. We don't see yet, but we will see in the coming minutes, once again, freeing the trapped victim, in this case, Inga, from behind the bookcase, and letting us now be able to, after 2 minutes, advance to where is that music coming from? Let's not forget, the violin is still in the background.
Yeah, still playing the whole time.
Remember that music.
Sean, before we wrap up then, now minute 27, anything you wanted to add about this minute?
I think we've covered everything I had on minute 27. I'm good.
Walt?
No, I think it's a very solid 2 minutes that they've put together, and it is continuing us down that path to see where Dr. Frankenstein goes.
All right, well then let's go ahead and put minute 27 to bed while these two characters are getting ready to explore deeper into the bowels of the House von Frankenstein. Sean, before we leave, is there where can we find you between now and tomorrow if you want to come back and play some more?
Sure. I'd love to come back. Thank you very much. Always love to talk about The Young Frankenstein. But if folks want to hear me talk about another great comedy that also has some interesting non-comedic aspects, you can find me over at groundhogminute.com. And that's where myself and my wonderful co-host Dave Pallas talk about the movie Groundhog Day. One repetitive minute at a time.
Walt, where can people find us when we're not, combing the bowels of the Frankenstein castle?
People can find us all over the place. The best place to find us is on our website, www.thewilderride.com. There you can find links to our Facebook page, our Patreon page, which we would really encourage you to take a look at, and our Twitter handle and all the other great places you can find us.
And don't forget to head on over to iTunes and just give us a rating. Tell us what you think. We love to get the feedback there. That helps, as with all podcasts, including Groundhog Day, it helps all of us get maybe a little more recognition with the algorithms that drive all those different podcast players to see about maybe spotlighting us. So we appreciate all you guys going out there and taking a moment to tell us what you think of the podcast. I guess until tomorrow when we come back for minute 28, where we now have a wide open secret passage, we will find out where it leads and see what happens when they go deeper into the castle von Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Put the candle back.